I'm going to say this. My guess is everybody's going to immediately, our minds are going to go to a preschool classroom, a kindergarten classroom. I'm going to talk about it. So there's an expression that people say, there's no such thing as a bad person. There's only a good person who does bad things. And yes, when I hear that, when I hear the words come out of my mouth, the first thing I think is kindergarten classroom. The truth is there are a lot of things that we tell kindergarten children that are very true and sometimes very, very deep. And it's easy to just dismiss them as kindergarten classroom cliches. And this is one example of that where it's understandable why people could find that frustrating and maybe a bit ridiculous and unhelpful and unhealthy, etc., especially said in the context of adults. And again, that's like, this is like a lot of things. It's because I think people say it, think about the meaning, just the definition of the words without thinking about what it actually means. And when we dig a little deeper and see what does it actually mean, what's it actually saying, why is it that when we say it to a child in kindergarten, it's not a lie? And if someone thinks that it is a lie, then they shouldn't be saying it to kindergarten children, frankly. I'm a very big believer of this, that children are people and we shouldn't lie to children any more than we should lie to adults. Perhaps lying to children is more damaging and more dangerous because you teach them that truth doesn't mean anything. And if you think you can lie to children and they're not going to know, I have a galaxy to sell you. So if we say this to children, hopefully, when we say it to a child, we believe that it's true. So why is it that we believe that it's true when we say it to a child and we don't believe it's true when we say it to an adult? So just to ground this a little, this Shabbos is Yom Kippur, the, let's say, Parsha of the week is Yom Kippur, is Teshuvah. When it comes to Yom Kippur, there is an interesting dispute that's discussed in the Gemara. So we know that Yom Kippur, or as it's more formally known, Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement, is just that. It's a day that atones, that cleanses sins, etc. Things that we've done wrong, places where we've fallen short. And there's a discussion in the Gemara about, between a couple of different opinions. One says that Yom Kippur, the wording in the Gemara is, the technical wording is, Yom Kippur mechaper l'shavim. Shavim, teshuvah. Yom Kippur atones for those who have done teshuvah. So if someone prepares for Yom Kippur by doing teshuvah for all the things that they've done wrong, by putting in the effort and doing the work to return, to repair as much as they can the things that they've done wrong, then Yom Kippur comes and atones and washes it all away once they've done their part. The second opinion is that Yom Kippur is mechaper l'shavim v'le'enam shavim. Yom Kippur will atone and cleanse regardless of whether a person has done teshuvah or not. Yom Kippur atones, period. It's not dependent on the work that a person did to do teshuvah, to return, repair, etc.
You translated like Yom Kippurim as like the Day of Atonement, but isn't it like also technically lots?
That would be Purim. Kippur, that would be Yom HaPurim. It could be that where you're coming from is we do talk about this on Purim, talking about the power of the opportunity of Purim when we dig a little deeper beneath the surface of the masks and the costumes and all of those things. And there we emphasize that in a certain sense, Purim actually takes Yom Kippur to an even deeper, the power and the opportunity of Yom Kippur is actually in some ways even deeper and stronger on Purim. And so we say that Yom HaKippurim is Kippurim, like Purim, secondary, similar to, comparable to Purim. So Purim takes it even a step further, but that is more of a drush level analysis of the name, because it's not Purim and it's not Kippurim, it's Kippurim. So it's Kippur. Kippur, kapara means atonement. So, was there another question? So, it's easy to make a mistake and to misunderstand the dispute here. Because it could seem like one opinion, the first one that we quoted, says that Yom Kippur, that a person has to do teshuvah, has to repent, return, repair. And the other opinion says, well, Yom Kippur does it for you. But if we look at the words, that's not what it says. Both opinions say that Yom Kippur is mechaper. Yom Kippur atones. One opinion, the Chachamim, the sages, this is the majority opinion, that it is mechaper l'shavim. It atones for those who have done teshuvah, which means it doesn't just say Yom Kippur doesn't do anything. Yom Kippur is a day when you can do teshuvah. It says Yom Kippur atones for those who have done teshuvah, which means that there are two distinct phenomena here. There is the teshuvah, the repenting, the returning and repairing, and then there is the atonement for Yom Kippur. They're two things. The activation of the atonement of Yom Kippur is dependent on a person having done teshuvah. So Yom Kippur is mechaper l'shavim. Yom Kippur will atone, will cleanse far beyond what one can achieve through teshuvah. But a person has to have done teshuvah. Doing teshuvah is a prerequisite to activate Yom Kippur, to reap the benefits, the opportunity of Yom Kippur, which is this atonement. If they were just saying that, well, you just have to do teshuvah, Yom Kippur is an opportunity to do teshuvah, they wouldn't say it is mechaper l'shavim, it atones for those who have done teshuvah. It would just say Yom Kippur is an opportunity to do teshuvah, but it says it will atone for those who have done teshuvah, which means there are two phenomena. The first one is, which is that we have to do teshuvah, we have to return and repair. That is a prerequisite in order to activate the power of the opportunity of Yom Kippur. But both of these opinions, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says it atones for everyone, and according to the Chachamim, the sages, the majority opinion, who say that it only atones for those who have done teshuvah, both of them are in agreement that Yom Kippur here is doing something far beyond teshuvah, beyond what we can achieve through our process of return and repair. The question becomes, what is this? What does Yom Kippur do? How does Yom Kippur do it? What's going on? To say that a person can do the work, can go through the process of returning, of repairing, etc., that can make sense. We can make sense of that. But what does it mean that Yom Kippur, this day, it just atones? How? What? What's going on? Question?
If a person knows that they can do more teshuvah, like you stand in shul and you're thinking of all the averas that you did, or you're thinking of all the ways that you can improve, and you're making your haftarah, but you know that there's an extra step that you could make. Does that mean that it's going to be a like you're still making your teshuvah, you're still making a conscious effort to consider the things that you could do wrong, but then you know that there's more that you could be doing, or you feel like there is more that you could be doing, but you've still done the initial teshuvah. Does that mean that you're still going to get atoned?
When you mean there could be more, do you mean there are more things you could do teshuvah for, or do you mean you could take the process of teshuvah further?
Both.
Okay, so when it comes to this is true in a sense for both. There is a halacha that says that, right, when it comes, there's something called kiddushin. Kiddushin means betrothal in halacha. Now, betrothal in halacha is not the same thing as what we think of when you talk about when people get engaged to be married. That's not kiddushin. Kiddushin halachically is a part one of marriage, and if two people enter into kiddushin together, they can't just decide to walk away. There actually has to be a proper, complete, formal divorce. So today, the way that things are set up is that we do kiddushin together under the chuppah. It's kiddushin and nisuin, the two stages, which we could, let's say, loosely translate as betrothal and marriage. They're both done together under the chuppah. Kiddushin is a very, very halachically significant phenomenon. Kiddushin, or two people entering into an agreement together of betrothal, of let's say partial marriage, depends on the conscious intent of both people to enter into this together. A man cannot betroth a woman and she becomes halachically betrothed if she wasn't interested, if she didn't commit and wasn't on board. And if a man goes through the motions but doesn't have actual intent, or it's not done properly, it's nothing, it's zero. Like any contract, if it's not done technically properly, the contract is void. And we're talking about something here that's important to the level of there needs to be a proper formal divorce if Kiddushin are enacted. So just let me finish this. So if a person, and there's such a thing as betrothing on conditions. So let's say a person could actually betroth a woman and, let's say, put a ring on her finger and say that she is Harayat Mekudeshes Li. He says to her that she is betrothed and she agrees and consents, and he says, on condition that, whatever it is, on condition that I earn $100,000 in the next 12 months so that we can start, with some degree of whatever it is. So then if he earns that money, they're engaged, she's betrothed, and if not, not, because there was a condition that they agreed to. And the halacha is, in general, any condition, there are basically no limits on what conditions we can make in a mutual contract, in a mutual transaction. When two people agree to enter into something together, whether it's a business, whether it's a loan, whether it's a sale, whether it's betrothal, if there are conditions that they both agree to, as long as they go through the technicalities of the conditions properly, then the conditions are valid. The Torah doesn't decide what conditions you can and can't make. As soon as a condition ventures into matters of pain and damage and things like that, it's a whole different conversation, because then it's not just transactional anymore. So if a person says, so this is what the Gemara says, it's very interesting. If a person puts a ring on a woman's finger and says, Harayat Mekudeshes Li, he says that she is betrothed to him on the condition that he is a complete tzaddik gomor. He is completely righteous. And we know that he just murdered 17 people yesterday. God forbid. Or he just, ate a cheeseburger on Yom Kippur yesterday, and then ate another cheeseburger this morning after Yom Kippur just to make sure that Yom Kippur wasn't mechaper. And then he rocks up and he just says, Harayat Mekudeshes Li, on condition, he says that to this woman, puts a ring on her finger, you are betrothed to me on the condition that I am a completely righteous. What do you think the halacha should be? Hello, that's a funny joke. No, the halacha is, the Gemara says, Mekudeshes misafek. They are betrothed, she's betrothed to him. From safek means as a matter of doubt, because we have no way of knowing that he didn't have Shema Hirher Tshuva Beliba. If he thought just for a second, as he was saying that, or right before, but it was genuine, he had a genuine thought of regret for what he did and commitment to turn things around in the future, he did halachic tshuva and he is a completely righteous person in this moment. It doesn't say that the Kiddushin are affected, but it says we have to treat them as though they are real. We have to treat the betrothal as though it is real, because we don't know that it's not. There's no way to know that it's not. So this means that for someone who has done every Avera in the book, if they have one moment of genuine thought and commitment, it's not something they could just say to someone, but genuine thought of regret and commitment for the future to turn things around, that could be a 100% complete teshuvah, to the extent that that person is a tzaddik gomer, a completely, absolutely, entirely righteous person. So there are lots of parts to teshuvah, but at the core of teshuvah is the state of being, it's the regret and the commitment. to the extent that this has a very real halachic ramification. It's not just some nice thing that we say, we're all going to be so inspired, it's so beautiful, don't worry. No, there's a halacha in the Gemara, Mukadeshas Misafek. So, there could always be more stages and more things to work on and ways to plan, to break it down, what that commitment looks like and how we're going to implement it practically, etc. But those things are very, very important, but they don't make or break whether the teshuvah is real and complete. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so now, coming back to this idea of, well, there's no such thing as a bad person, there's just a person who does bad things. Right? That can seem like silly and infantile, maybe would be a word to use. Why? It's the kind of thing that you would expect a child to say. It seems childish. Right, this person just did who knows what, they hurt people. It's like all of a sudden they're just a good person. The truth is that is actually the most absolutely correct way of looking at it. And let's come at it from a different angle. Who here has ever either said about someone or heard someone say about someone, oh my goodness, they're a completely different person? Like you might have known someone really well and then you didn't see them for a month or a year or 2 years or 5 years and you see them and you're like, oh my goodness, they're a completely different person. Right? Intuitively, we all know what that means. But if we stop and think about it for a second, it doesn't actually make any sense. If they are a different person, then they're not them. It's a different person. Say, oh wow, I used to know someone and here is a different person. That's not the person that I used to know. We didn't say that. We said this person is a completely different person. So we're saying two contradictory things at the same time. They are the same person who used to be a different person, so they're both the same person and a different person at the same time. If I'm talking to all of you now and then I go and walk out of the room and go down the street and see someone else, it's not like, oh my goodness, they all became a different person. It's like, no, this is just a different person. So when you say they became a different person, they cannot have become a completely different person because then it's not them. So did they become a different person or are they the same person? Now, I'm guessing that probably what many, some, most, all of you are feeling in response to that is like, that's like such a just small-minded way of like, we all know what you mean. Like, come on, don't be so semantic. Don't pick on the words and like get all carried away. The question is though, can we articulate why? Because if the statement as it's presented, and if we look at the statement and could say, this statement does not make sense as stated, but we all say it and or understand exactly what someone means when they say it, if we can't articulate why it makes sense, then we owe it to ourselves to slow down and stop and think about, okay, why does it make sense? Why is it that we all intuitively understand exactly what it means? No one thinks it's a strange thing to say, even though it literally makes no sense and is a conceptually incompatible combination of things to say in one statement. So in Hebrew, there are two words. These are words that are used in Chakira, in Torah philosophy, and in Kabbalah, and in Chassidus. And these words are Metzias and Mahus. Now, it's not so easy to really articulate precisely what the difference between them is. It can be a little difficult, but I think if we boil it down to the literal, actual technical meaning of the words, in some ways it's a little bit more technical, but I feel like in some ways that might actually be the clearest way of approaching it. Who knows what a metzia is? Sorry?
An exit.
Exit? That would be yitzia. Metzia. Oh, I found a metzia. I got a metzia. Anyone? A metzia. What's a metzia? When
something special.
right. This is like, come on, Judaism 101. Metzia means a bargain, a good deal. Why? Metzia means find, right? Matzasi, I found. Metzia literally means a find. If you see something at its regular price, you don't, unless it's very hard to get. If it's hard to get, then you found it. Well, I found a way to get hold of this thing. That is a bargain. That is an opportunity. But if you see something that's readily available and you see it at the regular price, you can say, I found it. It's just like, yeah, you could just like turn around, like turn 15 degrees and you'll see another one. Metzia means something that we found. It's unique. Metzius, in a sense, is foundness. The way that we are experienced by our environment, the way that we are seen, the way that we are experienced, which is our body, our appearance, our voice, our personality. All of these things are different layers of our metzius. Our mahus, ma, what? Probably the most precisely accurate translation of mahus would be whatness, our mahus, our whatness. What is it? Not how does it appear, how do we experience it, how is it presented, how is it felt, how is it found, what does it seem like? What is it? It's mahus, it's whatness, the thing itself, the person themselves. When you meet someone and you say, oh my goodness, they're a completely different person, you can say, you're clearly indicating here that at the same time they are the same person and a completely different person because you're referring to two different things. The mahus, who they are, is the same person. The way that they present, the way that they behave, their personalities, the way that their experience has completely changed. So it's the same person at the level of the mahus of what they are. At the level of the metzius, the way that they are found, experienced, completely different. So it's not a contradiction because we're talking about two different layers within the person. One has not changed and one has changed. And the mahus can never change. That's why you will always, no matter how much someone changes, you will always be able to say they are a changed person. They are a completely different person. They are an entirely new person, unrecognizable, but you're still saying they are because the mahus has not changed. Everything about them may have changed deep, deep down. Every layer of metzius on top of that may have changed. They may have changed. They may have done work to the point that they think differently, they perceive differently, they see differently, they feel differently. Everything about them has changed, but the mahus is the same. That's why you could still say they are a changed person. And I think also a point here of confusion or lack of clarity that can make people roll their eyes when you're like, there's no such thing as a bad person, there's just good people who do bad things, and people will roll their eyes probably for several reasons, but one of them is, oh, so now nobody's responsible for what they do anymore, they're a good person, they just did a bad thing. And the truth is, the issue that people take when they make that statement or that claim or express that issue is actually based on almost a cognitive distortion, and it's probably very common. But it's based on a misunderstanding or a cognitive distortion in the first place, which is why we have that issue. Because we are confusing the person with the actions. The fact that a person is a good person or a bad person doesn't has no input on the fact that they are responsible for the things they have done. If someone is a good person, let's say someone's a good person and that, to the point that everybody in the world agrees that they're a good person. The religious people, the atheists, the Democrats, the Republicans, the libertarians, the everybody, and Israel and Hamas, lahavdil elef alfei avdalas, and Hezbollah, everybody agrees that this is a good person, hypothetically. And this person makes a judgment call in a certain situation that they feel that based on certain circumstances, there's something that they are going to do that is technically a wrong thing to do. But when they do a cost-benefit analysis, they say, look, this is, in the bigger picture, it's right. And I am going to do this even though technically it's the wrong thing, even though I'm breaking the law, even though I'm doing whatever it is, because it's the right thing at the end of the day, all things considered. And then at the end of the day, and let's say they do it, you can look at someone and agree with the fact, let's say, or a judge, let's say a judge is sitting in a courtroom. They can be presiding over a court case and look at a defendant or someone in front of them in the courtroom and say, I believe that you are a good person. I believe that your intentions were positive. And I believe that you made the right decision in breaking this law. You did it for the right reason, and I think it was the right thing. And if I was in your situation, I would have done the same thing. That being said, the law is the law, and it doesn't remove the responsibility for breaking the law. You should have broken the law. It was the right thing, but you did break the law, and the responsibility is there. Right? The fact that morally the person, let's say, did the right thing, and maybe in an extreme case, everyone agrees that they did the right thing. They are a good person. They did the right thing. They made the right choice. The right choice was to break the law. Breaking this law carries such and such a punishment. One has nothing to do with the other. One is a responsibility that we have. In a legal system, a person has a responsibility to keep the law. Now, is there room? Sometimes a judge will say, you know what? We're good. Don't worry about it. I'll let you go. Sometimes, and maybe there's a time and a place for that, but it's not like there's something wrong if the judge says, you're a good person. I 100% agree with what you did. I would do the same thing. But the law is the law, and if I was in your shoes, I would do the same thing and accept that punishment or that consequence on myself because it's the right thing to do. Two different things. Good person versus bad person has nothing to do with being responsible for our actions. That's number one. So saying that someone's not a bad person is not a statement that this person is not responsible for their actions or for the outcomes of their actions. No one ever said that. That's one misunderstanding or cognitive distortion that people have, which is why they'll push back against a statement like this. And another one is the fact that even our thoughts and our feelings are not who we are all the way deep down. And what's the evidence? If someone changes the way they think, if someone develops if someone works on and their emotional profile evolves and develops and changes, you can say, this person has changed. This person now thinks differently. This person now feels differently, which means same person, different thoughts, different feelings. Now, on one hand, yes, we would say they are a new person because the person that we encounter is different. But in that same statement, we're acknowledging that it is them who is the new person. Because the person actually hasn't changed. Which means there's the person, and then there are the thoughts that the person thinks. There's the person, and then there are the feelings that they feel. There is the person, and then there are actions that they do. Now, can you imagine a situation, a scenario, where there is a person who did terrible things? Like, all the worst things you could ever imagine. Like all the worst things, the most egregious things that a person could ever do. And then this person, and I'm not saying what this person says when they show up in court. I'm saying for real. A person sees the light, finally appreciates, the ramifications of what they've done and gets a straightened out set of values, and really genuinely regrets what they've done and becomes a completely different person and spends the rest of their life helping people. Could that happen? For real? It can, and it does happen, right? There are people, numerous people who, grew up in gangs and have done all the most egregious things, and then whatever happens, they realize the cost and the damage and how wrong it was, and they change and they spend the rest of their life trying to help children not go down that path, helping people move forward into a healthier direction. So what that means is it's the same person. They are now a new person. So on one hand, yes, that was a bad person, let's say, and this is now a good person. At the level of Metzias, yes, the Metzias, the presentation, the way that they were experienced by the world, the way they interacted and presented to the world used to be bad. Now they have a different Metzias, now they're good. But at the level of Muhus, they're the same person. Which means if that person now is good, they never were bad. And it is true that while this person was doing every most egregious thing you could ever imagine, in that moment, it was the truth. It was technically, objectively correct to say that they were at minimum, let's say neutral. If we don't want to say good, they were a neutral person at a minimum who was doing bad things. It wasn't a bad person. And the evidence is it is possible that they could turn around and become a good person. It's still going to be them becoming a good person, which means that at the level of the mahus of who they are, they never were a bad person. They were a person who had bad thought behaviors, who had bad motivations, who had bad values, and who did very bad things, and is responsible for the bad things that they did. That has nothing to do with they were a good person or a bad person. And there is some degree of complexity here in holding all of these things together. And it does take, for someone who's never thought about it this way, it requires some degree of, I would say, dexterity of the mind to be able to let go and to see things with a little bit more flexibility and complexity. And it's understandable that for someone who's just never thought about things in this way, they're going to naturally just push back. But anybody who's prepared to stop, to slow down, to listen, can understand this. It's not rocket science. It's just a matter of maybe letting go of the convictions that, letting go of convictions can be a very unpleasant and scary thing to do. But at the end of the day, anybody can understand this. It's not rocket science. And it's very clearly true once you just stop and think about it for a minute. Question?
Yeah, the person that you're talking about, like, did all the worst things and then regretted it and did good. And you said at the level of the mahus, they were never really bad. Is that true if the person, like, regrets it and becomes true, or is it true for anyone because they always could regret it? And, like, we could say about the guy who started doing good stuff, like, oh, we see now that your external changed, so your mahus, you were never really bad. If we also say it for the person who's still doing bad things because he always could regret it and he always could end up being good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. If I were to ask you the question, what would you answer?
Yeah, like if you have the ability to, then it just hasn't activated yet.
Right, and yes, correct. And what's the answer? And what again? What's the evidence? I don't know if evidence is the right word, but let's do the math here. That person who did turn things around because they met someone, they had a moment, whatever it was, they saw the light, let's say, right, and they turned things around. We now have evidence of the fact that that person, when they were doing bad things, their mahus wasn't bad. They were a person who had bad thoughts, values, and did bad things, and is responsible for them. Had that person never had that moment where they saw the light, would that change who they were before that moment? Doesn't have any impact on who they were. They were who they were. Now they saw the light. Maybe had they not seen the light, they would have continued down that pathway. But the fact that they saw the light is the fact that they changed is it's not even the evidence. Evidence isn't the right word, right? It's the evidence for our minds that gives us the clarity in distinguishing between the person and the actions. But the fact that they turn things around isn't what makes them not a bad person in the past at the level of their mahus. That just gives us the clarity that the mahus was never bad. And that's true of everybody, because anybody... Now, you might look at someone and say, well, that person is never turning around. Now, first of all, some of these people who did turn around, had you seen them before they turn around, you would have said the same thing. You would have bet $1 million. People would bet their lives this person will never turn around. I mean, these are people who did the most, people who spent their time thinking about how to make things as egregious and horrific as possible and then doing them. There is no way you would, a regular person who hasn't really given this thought and worked this through is going to look at a person like that and say, oh, yeah, they're just a person who has bad values and is doing things and they could totally just turn their life around. But we've seen people like that do it. And we all know that potentially anyone could, hypothetically. Maybe for some people, the statistical likelihood of that happening is 0.00000000001% or less. But it's not a technical impossibility ever. Which means that this statement, that who the person is, their whatness, what they are, who they are not how they think, etc., who they are, is never bad. And it's the fact that who the person is never bad is the reason that anyone, no matter how they think, no matter what their values are, no matter how they feel, no matter what they've done, and no matter what they're doing in the present moment, can potentially become a different person at the level of their metzias, because the muhus has the capacity to be the best person in the world. And it's the same muhus, it doesn't change. Right, now, to take this a step further, when it comes to, let's say, not judging, and this is actually a technique that I used. There was a stage when, judgment was something that came to me very naturally, and it was something that I did a lot of work on. And we're going to get now to a technique that I use, and the power of it to instantly change the way you see someone, if a person's judging someone, is incredible. I'm assuming that it's obvious to all of us that let's say someone is doing something bad. Is it reasonable to assume that if their parent observes them doing it, and a random stranger observes them doing the same thing at the same time, it's likely that the random person is going to have a much more critical moral judgment of this person, and the parent is likely to have much less of a critical moral judgment of the person? Yes. Why? Because the fact is that the moral judgment of the person is incorrect. Naturally, we see actions. We relate to actions and words, not to muhus. So when we see someone behaving a certain way, especially if we see them doing it consistently, naturally, it's not unreasonable that a person will, perhaps subconsciously without even realizing it, make a moral judgment of that towards that person. The parent has an existing relationship with their child in whom they see the muhus naturally, at least at some level. They know that this child is not the actions. They know who this child is. They know that this child is, for whatever reason, behaving the way that they're behaving. And, ideally, a parent would manage things in a way in which they teach the child that they are responsible and that there are consequences for the actions, but without the moral judgment. And it's natural that a parent is going to feel much less moral judgment towards their own child than another person will have towards that same person. And by child, the child might be an adult, but it's their son or their daughter. The reason that the parent is likely to have less moral judgment is because the parent sees the child much closer at the level of the muhus than the metzias. If we could look at the person and appreciate that there is a person here, and this person thinks the way that they think and feels the way that they feel and did this thing, and none of those things are their muhus, all of that is the metzias and their actions and their behavior, and separate the two, we can then be likely to be much less morally judgmental towards the person themselves. And so something that getting back to what I was saying, this skill, something that I've utilized, and it's the power of it is incredible, is when I would catch myself feeling very judgmental towards someone. I watch someone do something and I'm like, oh my goodness, whoa, I'm feeling judgmental towards them, feel myself having a moral judgment towards the person, and stop and just think, imagine that I'm this person's mother or this person's father. Imagine that this person is my son or daughter. How would I look at it? And instantly, everything changes. And it's not because the parent feels so sorry for their child. No, it's because the parent has the more correct view. And it's natural and reasonable that we don't, for people with whom we have no existing relationship at the level of where there's some sort of connections to something deeper than just our actions and our words. If that's what we know, that's what we see and hear, then that's what we have to work with. but that's not really the person. And if we can put ourselves in a mindset to see that clearly, and ultimately, and the reason why I use that visual of imagining that it's my son or daughter, or imagining that I'm their mother or father, is because ideas are good for the mind. To get something from being an idea, and for that to actually affect the way that we feel, by process of appreciating the concept of it, is a complex, demanding process that takes time, and there is no way to shortcut that. There is no turbocharging or expressing that, running that in Express. But if we can change the picture, not just up here, but in here, if we can change the picture in a way that we feel the difference, because that moral judgment is assuming that moral judgment is happening at a visceral level where we feel it and we're not just thinking it. If we're thinking it, we can reframe academically and it's good. But if we feel that judgment, sometimes we'll try to say, don't judge that you don't know, and we still feel the judgment in here. Then reframe in here. Visualize it, feel it. Imagine this is your son or daughter. Imagine this is your brother. Imagine this is your sister, your best friend. Imagine that you are that person's mother or father. Visualize it, and then you feel it differently, and things can change instantly. And the reason it's so powerful is because that is actually the objectively correct perspective, the objectively more accurate narrative, perhaps. Question?
So what if that person that is the worst person we know is a close relative, or someone that Hashem is a parent, and we have never seen that good modeling, and we don't know how to turn compassion towards that person. Does that make my question make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot, but what's the actual question?
Like, how do we do that? If it,
is the question, how do we do that towards someone else if we've never experienced a healthy example of that in our own life?
Yes, and especially so for someone who was supposed to do that, did the opposite. Really.
You know what? The truth is, it's a good question, and it's not so simple. And it does make it a lot more difficult. And for someone who has never experienced or felt that, and doesn't even relate to what that looks like or feels like, it is much more difficult. And that's exactly why. Now, it could be that for a person in that situation, what they're going to have to do is, it could be that they're going to have to revert more to the process of learning and allowing things to filter down gradually. Also, another approach could be for that person to take a somatic approach to teaching their body basic things, like a person whose body has been on alert their whole life because there was never an environment in which they felt safe, because there was always a threat. They were always going to be criticized. They were always going to be judged. They were always going to be maybe even physically abused, or just mentally abused, manipulated emotionally, whatever it is. That person's body has never felt safe, and that person's nervous system has been on alert their whole life. They're probably not even going to have the ability or the capacity for these ideas to filter down from here to here, because their nervous system is doing its job and saying, no, I have never been safe in my life. None of that, please. I'm protecting myself at all costs, no matter what. So a person in a situation like that would benefit a lot from an approach of teaching their body that it can feel safe and that there is safety. And that is generally, for someone in a situation like that, it's going to require another person who has a very regulated nervous system to be present with them, so their body can finally feel, oh my goodness, wow, safe energy. Now that sounds like a very woo-woo thing to say, but it's not. Right? When someone walks into the room and sits next to you and they're extremely tense, you feel the tension, right? And our bodies feel other people's nervous energy. And if you're in proximity to someone who is very regulated and they feel safe and present, for someone who's never experienced that before, because everyone they've been around has been in a state of panic and self-defense their whole life, they don't know what it feels like. Their body hasn't have the capacity to do that. And then if a person can sit down with someone, be, in an environment together with someone who's like that, and their body all of a sudden is like, oh my goodness, that's what that feels like. let me try to do that. And then learn things like breathing exercises can be extremely impactful and things like that, so that the person can teach their body that it can be safe. And then you can work with the ideas, and the ideas actually have the ability to make their way into the body, because the body doesn't feel like it has to fight everything that is not self always. They can get there. But the fact is, the reality is, it is going to be a longer and more difficult and challenging process for some than for others. Right? It's one of these two things that are true at the same time. Everybody has challenges, right? And sometimes we look around at someone and you're like, oh my goodness, they have it all. They've got everything in their life is just perfect. Like, it might look that way. Guaranteed, that's not their experience. Everybody has challenges. Everybody has real challenges that are difficult and that are unpleasant and that are painful, at least at some times. That also doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's challenges are equal, right? Some people's lives are more difficult and challenging than others. And for whatever reason, those people have that journey that was designed for their soul and for the things that they have to bring into the world and to share with the world. For whatever reason, the journey of doing that looks like this. But yeah, it is going to be more demanding for some people. On one hand, looking at it this way can make it seem like a little bit like, oh my goodness, that person has no hope. But the truth is, it's the reverse. Once we understand why it seems so difficult and it's very real and there are very real mechanics here, it also is very empowering because we can see there is a pathway forward. It might be that it's going to take time to get, there's no all the way there because there's always further. But the first few steps there can have an unimaginable permanent impact on shifting someone's life completely. For a person who's never felt safety, their nervous system has never felt safety in their life, and then they sit down with someone who's just present with them and being there with them and has a very regulated and safe feeling nervous system and is just there completely present with them, just that experience can permanently alter a person's experience for the rest of their life in ways that are unimaginably dramatic. And the more extreme a person's circumstances were and the more difficult it was, the more they're going to benefit and the bigger the shift is going to be there. And then there is very real, substantial, rapid progress that can be made forward. But it is going to be some people don't have to have that process. It's true. And you know what? It's not fair. It isn't. But the pathway is there for everyone. It doesn't look the same for everybody, but it's there. And so yes, for a person to be able to just do that reframe, and especially to have the capacity to do the reframe down here, not just up here, is a huge gift. And it's a privilege. But that could be a bit of a loaded word the way it's become, because that's not a bad thing. If someone has an opportunity, embrace it with two hands, make the most of it, and you'll be better equipped to then help other people who don't have the privilege. Right? A privilege is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. It's not fair, but it's a good thing. Right? And denying privileges just means that we're going to not get the most out of them, which is going to limit our capacity to help people who didn't have the privileges. So it's not helping anybody. So that was a long answer to that question. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah.
So now, because we have to finish up now, coming back to Yom Kippur is, the nature of time of Yom Kippur is such that mahus, what is our mahus? What are we? What we are is a spark of divinity, a spark of the absolute infinity of the Creator, of Hashem, of God, inside of us. We are one with God, period. And then there are layers on top of 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 layers. And there are thoughts and there are words that we spoke and things that we did. And they do need to be corrected and repaired, etc. And that's why the halacha is that Yom Kippur is mechaper l'shav, and we do have to do teshuvah in order to get to the atonement of Yom Kippur, because we are responsible for our actions. But once we do the teshuvah can repair, but it can't make something never have existed. That's fake. Until you get to that place in which we are one with Hashem. And at the level of our muhus, nothing we think, say, do, feel, nothing has any impact on our muhus at all. And Yom Kippur is a day when the muhus, which is usually what we are, but it's got nothing to do with the way we present and behave and feel and think, etc. That muhus bubbles up and it becomes everything. So if we did the teshuvah, which is the prerequisite to allow Yom Kippur to do its thing, what happens on Yom Kippur is that we connect to the level at which we are all a good person, we are all divine. And even if we did do bad things and all the most egregious things ever, we never were actually at the level of muhus, we never were a bad person. We were a person who is ultimately a spark of God at the deepest level, who had maybe bad values and bad ideas and bad feelings and thought bad things and said bad things and did bad things. So we have the responsibility for that. When we take responsibility, Yom Kippur is an opportunity then to dig down to the level where actually none of that really does exist. And this is why, class dismissed, everyone, like that's done. I want to add a little more, but I don't want to keep you here, so anyone who needs to go and have a breather for the next class is welcome to. There are sort of, I guess, there are two sides to this. Let's say a unhealthy relationship between a parent and a child, in some ways those are the most painful unhealthy relationships because that's so the opposite of what it's supposed to be. But at the end of the day, in a parent-child relationship, there is always going to be the possibility of repair in a way that isn't necessarily always there in every other relationship. In any relationship with any person, there is always the hypothetical possibility that we could dig down and see the person for who they are, etc. In a parent and a child, that is baked into the cake. It's there. Now, people can do, children towards parents and parents towards children, unfortunately, God forbid, are capable of doing egregious things, and there could be all kinds of things that lead to that, etc. But even a parent who has really hurt a child, or a child who has really hurt a parent, there is a potential to get to the other side of that in a way that isn't necessarily the same in other relationships. And it goes hand in hand with the fact that it's more painful than it would be in another relationship. Because it's not supposed to be like that. This is supposed to be this relationship is supposed to be the deepest and most absolute source of connection and nurture and safety, etc. But that also means, and what does it look like, right? If there's going to be a repair in a relationship like this, right? Step number one is whoever, has things that they need to take responsibility for, they take responsibility for them. But the responsibility is not the repair, right? Just like here, the teshuvah is the prerequisite. Where does the repair actually lie? The repair is going to lie in the parent and the child, or the siblings, or whatever it is, really reconnecting at the level at which they have an intrinsic connection that's there. That's the thing that's going to get beyond everything, because at the level of that connection, that connection can never be changed. A person can disown a family member, that doesn't mean they could be legally not related, but they still are. It's absolute and it can't be changed. Once people take responsibility for their actions and they put themselves then in a position to continue beyond that further, if the more that they can tap in within themselves and then in the other person to that level at which they do have an absolute connection, that is where the real repair is going to come from. Now, yes, for someone who has hurt someone and doesn't take responsibility, it's going to be just about impossible to tap into that. But the real repair doesn't come from the taking responsibility. The taking responsibility is a prerequisite that allows you to get to reconnecting, to getting into that connection, and it's the connection that's going to allow that repair to happen to a degree that might not be possible in other relationships. And that's what Yom Kippur is. It's that point of natural connection where we are one with Hashem. It's the Mahus and it's absolute. Wishing everyone a Gemar Chesima Tova, a year that is both truly good and tastes sweet. Tova u'Mesukkah.